In the year 1220, the city of Nishapur thrived under a sun that cast long shadows over its bustling bazaars and winding alleys. Nestled along the fabled Silk Road, it was a jewel of culture and commerce, a beacon where East met West, and where the hum of merchants haggling mingled with the wisdom of scholars debating under shaded courtyards. The scent of exotic spices, the gleam of silk, and the vibrant colors of Persian carpets painted a scene of prosperity and promise. Yet beneath this vibrant tapestry, a storm gathered on the horizon, one that would unravel the very fabric of life in Nishapur. The city streets were alive with the footsteps of artisans shaping clay into pottery, scribes inscribing verses on parchment, and traders negotiating deals that would ripple through distant lands. Children chased each other past the great madrasa, their laughter echoing against the ancient walls, oblivious to the rumblings of dread that seeped slowly through whispered rumors. At the city gates, guards kept watch, their eyes scanning the horizon for threats not yet visible to the untrained gaze. Among Nishapur's ruling elite, Shah Malik, the governor, sat in his chamber overlooking the city's central square. His furrowed brow betrayed the weight of the news that had reached him. The Mongol hordes, fierce and seemingly unstoppable, were advancing relentlessly across the steppes, their reputation for destruction preceding them like a dark cloud. Messengers bearing fragmented reports spoke of villages razed, innocents slaughtered, and entire regions swallowed by the Mongol tide. Yet, despite the growing unease, Shah Malik clung to hope, convinced that his city's walls and alliances could hold firm against the approaching storm. The governor's council convened beneath vaulted ceilings adorned with intricate tile work, the air thick with tension and the scent of burning incense. Scholars and generals debated strategies, their voices a mixture of fear and determination. Some urged negotiation, hoping to buy time through diplomacy, while others prepared for the grim inevitability of war. Yet, amidst the clamor, few truly grasped the scale of devastation that the Mongols would unleash, nor the nature of the terror that would soon descend upon Nishapur. Beyond the city's towering walls, the Mongol armies marched with relentless precision. Led by Genghis Khan's generals, these warriors were bound not just by allegiance, but by a ruthless vision of conquest that shattered traditional notions of warfare. Their reputation for brutality was matched only by their cunning. They wielded fear as a weapon, breaking the spirit of enemies before the first arrow was loosed. Tales of their campaigns traveled ahead of them. Villages burned to ash, populations decimated, and survivors scattered like leaves before a storm. In the marketplace, merchants paused their haggling, glancing nervously toward the distant mountains where dust clouds marked the movement of the Mongol cavalry. Families whispered prayers for protection, while scholars debated the historical implications of this new force sweeping across Asia. Yet, for many, the Mongols remained a distant threat, an abstract menace cloaked in myth and rumor rather than immediate reality. The narrative shifts here, peeling back the layers of this impending catastrophe to reveal a dimension often overlooked in the annals of history. The Mongol invasions were not solely campaigns of military conquest, but calculated acts of psychological terror and cultural obliteration. The story of Nishapur, in particular, exposes the harrowing experiences of its inhabitants, merchants who had woven trade networks across continents, families who had cultivated knowledge and art, and scholars who had preserved the wisdom of generations. Their lives, once vibrant and intertwined with the pulse of the Silk Road, would soon face an unimaginable reckoning. Shah Malik, despite his cautious optimism, found his nights haunted by visions of devastation. He summoned his most trusted advisors and emissaries, urging them to seek terms with the Mongol commanders. Yet, the Mongols' reputation for merciless retribution cast a shadow over any hopes for mercy. The governor's pleas were met with silence, and the city's defenses, though formidable, could not guarantee salvation against an enemy that defied conventional tactics. As the Mongol forces drew closer, the people of Nishapur grappled with a mounting sense of dread. The once celebratory streets grew quieter, markets emptied earlier, and gatherings took on a solemn tone. Mothers held their children tighter, imams led prayers for deliverance, and elders recounted stories of past sieges, searching for lessons or omens. Yet, No tale could prepare them for the storm that was about to break. In the twilight hours, as lanterns flickered in the cool desert breeze, a group of scholars gathered in a dimly lit chamber of the city's grand library. They spoke in hushed tones about the fragility of civilization and the impermanence of power. Scrolls and manuscripts, chronicling centuries of knowledge, lay scattered around them, treasures that might soon be lost to flames. Among them sat Farid, a young poet whose verses captured the beauty and sorrow of his homeland. He lifted his quill hesitantly, seeking to preserve in words the essence of Nishapur before it faced its darkest hour. The city, vibrant and unyielding, teetered on the edge of oblivion. The coming days would test the resilience of its people and the strength of its culture. In the hearts of Nishapur's inhabitants burned a flicker of hope, a hope that even in the face of overwhelming force, the spirit of a community might endure beyond the ruins. But as the Mongol banners appeared on the distant horizon, this hope was shadowed by the chilling reality that history often remembers only the conquerors, while the stories of the conquered fade into silence. This narrative does not seek merely to recount the fall of a city, but to illuminate the human faces behind the siege, the merchants whose caravans would never reach their destinations, the families torn apart by fear and loss, and the scholars whose knowledge teetered on the brink of extinction. It is a story of an impending catastrophe that would ripple far beyond Nishapur's walls, reshaping the course of civilizations along the Silk Road and leaving scars that echo through time. The city's last days of peace were marked by a fragile calm, a deceptive quiet before the storm. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Nishapur in golden hues, its people prepared for a fate they could scarcely imagine. The Mongol army's approach was not just a march of soldiers, but a harbinger of destruction that would forever alter the landscape of history and memory. And so, beneath the stars that had witnessed centuries of trade and learning, Nishapur stood on the brink, its vibrant life poised to be shattered, its stories at risk of being swallowed by the relentless tide of conquest. What followed would reveal the true depths of human suffering and resilience, a chapter of history that demands not only remembrance, but reflection. By the early decades of the 13th century, the Mongol Empire was a force unlike any the world had seen before, a vast, sweeping tide that surged from the steppes of Central Asia and reshaped the very contours of continents. Their expansion was swift and relentless, a juggernaut of mounted warriors who seemed to defy both geography and time. From the windswept plains of Mongolia to the forests of Eastern Europe, the Mongols stamped their presence with a combination of military ingenuity and an almost unfathomable capacity for cruelty. Unlike the empires that preceded them, the Mongols waged war with a chilling calculus that went beyond mere conquest. Their strategies were designed not only to subjugate, but to annihilate the will of entire populations. Cities that resisted were razed, survivors were dispersed or executed in mass numbers, their homes turned to ash and dust. The Mongol commanders understood that terror itself could be wielded as a weapon, a psychological tool to break the spirit of enemies before swords clashed or arrows flew. This was an empire built on the foundations of fear as much as on the spoils of war. Nishapur, with its thriving markets, scholarly institutions, and vibrant culture, became an early and tragic example of this brutal approach. The city, once a jewel of the Silk Road, stood as a testament to centuries of human achievement, craftsmen shaping delicate ceramics, poets composing verses that echoed through caravansaries, and merchants weaving networks that spanned continents. But to the Mongols, these were not symbols of civilization to be preserved. They were obstacles to be eradicated in the name of domination. The Mongol military machine was unparalleled in its efficiency. Mounted archers, masters of speed and precision, encircled cities with terrifying rapidity. Their tactics combined feigned retreats with sudden assaults, sowing confusion and panic among defenders. But beyond the battlefield, their cruelty was systematic and absolute. Once a city fell, the Mongols often enacted massacres that erased entire populations. It was a ruthless message inscribed in blood. Resistance invited annihilation. In the case of Nishapur, the Mongols' fury was exacerbated by a local rebellion that flared amid the siege. This uprising, born of desperation and defiance, only hardened the Mongol commander's resolve. When the city walls finally crumbled, the retribution was swift and merciless. Tens of thousands perished in what would become one of the most infamous massacres of the Mongol conquests, a grim chapter that echoed far beyond the city's ruined streets. But the devastation was not confined to lives lost. The Mongols understood the power of cultural destruction as a tool of subjugation. Irrigation systems that had sustained fertile lands for generations were deliberately destroyed, turning once lush fields into barren wastelands. Livestock, the backbone of local economies, were slaughtered or driven away. Libraries, repositories of knowledge and memory, were burned, erasing the intellectual heritage of communities. The Mongol campaign was not merely about taking territory. It was about obliterating the identity of a people. Survivors of the massacre were scattered, forced into exile and dispersal. Families were torn apart, some members enslaved or used as human shields in further campaigns. News of Nishaper's fate spread like wildfire, a grim warning to neighboring cities and regions that the Mongol advance was inexorable and unforgiving. This terror served a strategic purpose. It discouraged resistance, compelling other cities to surrender without a fight, thus facilitating the empire's rapid expansion. Amid this horror, the human stories of Nishaper's inhabitants emerge from the shadows, illuminating the personal toll behind the staggering numbers. There was Karim, a merchant who had spent decades forging trade links from Nishaper to Samarkand and Baghdad, only to watch his caravans reduced to ashes. His wife, Layla, a skilled weaver whose tapestries had adorned the palaces of local governors, found herself fleeing with their children, the threads of her life unraveling in the chaos. Then there was Amina, a scholar dedicated to preserving ancient texts, who hid precious manuscripts beneath the floorboards of her home, hoping to safeguard fragments of history from the flames. Her efforts were a quiet act of resistance against the Mongol intent to erase not just people but memory itself. The stories of these individuals, and countless others, reveal the resilience and despair that intertwined in the shadow of destruction. The Mongols' campaign across Asia was thus not just a series of battles, but a calculated strategy of terror and cultural erasure. Their methods shattered the social and economic foundations of conquered regions, leaving scars that would influence the course of history. The fall of Nishaper stands as a stark illustration of this approach. A city once radiant with life, reduced to a ghostly ruin by the combined forces of military might and psychological warfare. This era also marked a turning point in the understanding of warfare and empire. The Mongols' use of mass executions and cultural obliteration challenged existing notions of conquest. Where earlier empires might have sought to incorporate and assimilate, the Mongols often chose destruction as a means of control. This brutal pragmatism was as much about ensuring stability through fear as it was about expanding borders. Yet, even in the face of such overwhelming devastation, traces of Nishaper's spirit endured. Survivors carried fragments of their culture into exile, preserving stories, traditions, and knowledge against the odds. The echoes of the city's vibrant past would resurface centuries later through archaeological discoveries and historical scholarship, piecing together the narrative of a civilization nearly lost. As the Mongol Empire stretched further west and south, the shadow of their brutality loomed over the Silk Road and beyond. Trade routes shifted, populations migrated, and cultural landscapes transformed under the weight of conquest and terror. Nishaper's destruction was both a symptom and a catalyst of these sweeping changes, a reminder that the Mongol impact was as much psychological and cultural as it was territorial. The story of Nishaper's fall thus invites us to look beyond the mere mechanics of siege and battle. It compels us to confront the deeper consequences of imperial ambition, the erasure of identities, the shattering of communities, and the resilience of those who survive in the wake of catastrophe. In this light, the Mongol conquests are not just chapters of military history, but profound lessons on the fragility of civilization and the enduring human cost of empire building. Through the lens of Nishaper, we begin to understand the Mongol Empire's unprecedented approach to warfare, not as a series of isolated events, but as a coherent strategy that blended terror, destruction, and psychological dominance. This understanding challenges us to reconsider the narratives of conquest, recognizing the voices of those who endured and the cultural heritage that survived against all odds. And so, as the dust settled over the ruins of Nishapur, the true scale of Mongol brutality came into sharp relief, not only in the lives extinguished, but in the cultural landscapes forever altered. The empire's legacy was etched in stone and blood, a testament to the destructive power of fear wielded as a weapon, and a somber reminder of what is lost when humanity's shared history is consumed by the fires of war. The siege of Nishapur began under a relentless sky, as the Mongol forces encircled the city with a precision and speed that left the defenders scrambling. Their encampments stretched like a dark ring around the city's ancient walls, cutting off all routes of escape and choking the lifelines that sustained the thriving metropolis. Inside, the city's inhabitants faced a tightening noose. Their markets emptied, supplies dwindled, and the once bustling streets grew quiet under the pall of impending doom. The defenders, a mix of local militia and seasoned soldiers, manned the ramparts with grim determination. But their efforts, valiant as they were, could hardly match the Mongols' superior tactics and numbers. Siege engines battered the walls day and night, while Mongol horsemen patrolled the surrounding plains, ready to crush any attempt at relief or escape. The city's leaders sent emissaries pleading for aid from neighboring regions, but the Mongol advance was swift and no help arrived. As weeks passed, desperation seeped into the hearts of Nishapur's people. Food shortages led to hunger and illness, and the crowded quarters became breeding grounds for disease. Families huddled in homes that had once been filled with laughter and music, now silent except for whispered prayers and the sound of distant battle. The city's mosques echoed with the call to faith, as imams implored the heavens to spare their beloved home. Amid this turmoil, a spark of rebellion flared within the city. Driven by frustration and a fierce will to survive, a faction of Nishapur's defenders launched a fierce, albeit desperate, uprising against the besieging forces. They struck at Mongol patrols, sabotaged siege equipment, and opened gates to allow small sorties. But this defiance came at a terrible cost. The Mongols, perceiving the uprising as a betrayal, unleashed their wrath with brutal efficiency. When the city walls finally crumbled, the Mongol fury was unleashed in full. What followed was not merely a conquest, but a calculated act of annihilation. The streets ran red as tens of thousands were slaughtered indiscriminately, men, women, and children alike. The massacre was so thorough and vast that it would echo through history as one of the darkest moments of the Mongol campaigns. Survivors were few, their trauma etched into the ruins of a once great city. But the Mongols' devastation extended beyond the immediate carnage. They targeted the very infrastructure that had sustained Nishapur for centuries. Irrigation canals, vital for turning arid lands into fertile fields, were deliberately destroyed, ensuring that agriculture would falter for generations. Livestock, prized for their economic and nutritional value, were slaughtered or driven off, severing the lifeblood of rural communities dependent on them. Perhaps most devastating was the destruction of knowledge itself. Nishapur's libraries, repositories of manuscripts, scientific treatises, and poetic works, were set ablaze. Flames consumed centuries of wisdom, reducing fragile scrolls and codices to ash. This cultural obliteration was a deliberate act, intended to erase the intellectual identity of the city and extinguish the light of its scholars. The loss was immeasurable, not just to Nishapur but to the broader world that had benefited from its contributions. The psychological warfare inflicted upon the survivors was equally harrowing. Those who escaped the initial massacre were scattered, forced into exile, their families torn apart by death and displacement. Many were enslaved or pressed into service within the Mongol armies, their identities erased and replaced by the demands of a conquering empire. The trauma spread like a contagion, seeping into neighboring regions, sowing fear and submission. Among those caught in this maelstrom was Rahim, a farmer whose fields once stretched green beyond the horizon. He watched helplessly as the irrigation ditches were shattered and his livestock driven away, the land turning barren beneath the scorch of Mongol destruction. His village emptied as families fled or were captured, and his own family was torn apart by the chaos. Yet, even in exile, Rahim carried memories of the land's former fertility, a painful reminder of what had been lost. In the city's ruined quarters, Amina, the scholar who had once hidden precious manuscripts, witnessed the flames engulfing the library she had so cherished. With tears staining her cheeks, she salvaged what remnants she could, smuggling fragments of knowledge out beneath her cloak. Her quiet resistance became a lifeline for preserving a culture the Mongols sought to erase. The Mongols' campaign was methodical in its destruction, a grim choreography designed to ensure that Nishapur would never rise again. The once vibrant city, which had pulsed with trade, art, and learning, was transformed into a ghost town, a silent testament to the empire's merciless intent. The ruins stood as a warning to others. Resistance would be met not just with defeat, but with obliteration. Across the Silk Road, the story of Nishapur's fall spread rapidly, carried by traders, refugees, and whispers of survivors. The message was clear and chilling. The Mongol advance was unstoppable, and cities that resisted faced annihilation. This terror served its purpose, compelling many to surrender without a fight, shifting the balance of power across the region. Yet, amid the ashes and despair, the human spirit endured. Survivors like Farid, the poet, and Amina clung to fragments of their heritage, preserving stories and knowledge in exile. These acts of remembrance and resilience ensured that the legacy of Nishapur was not entirely extinguished. The city's cultural heartbeat, though silenced, continued in the hearts of those who fled and those who would later uncover its story. The siege of Nishapur reveals the full extent of Mongol warfare, not just as a series of battles, but as a campaign of calculated terror and cultural destruction. Their methods went beyond the physical conquest of land. They sought to dismantle the social, economic, and intellectual foundations of the communities they conquered. This strategy reshaped the human landscape of Asia, leaving scars that would endure for centuries. As the dust settled over Nishapur's ruins, the once great city became a symbol of both devastation and endurance. Its fall was a stark reminder of the fragility of civilization in the face of overwhelming force, and the profound human cost embedded within the tides of history. The silence of its empty streets spoke volumes about the depths of loss and the resilience required to survive such darkness. Through the stories of those who lived, fought, and fled, the siege of Nishapur becomes more than a historical event. It becomes a testament to the endurance of memory itself. The city's shattered stones and smoldering ruins hold the echoes of lives interrupted, cultures threatened, and a world forever changed by the relentless march of empire. Centuries passed, and Nishapur lay buried beneath layers of dust and time, a silent ruin reclaimed by the earth that once nurtured its gardens and bustling streets. The city's shattered walls crumbled slowly into the sands, a graveyard of memories that whispered of a lost era. For generations, travelers passed over its forgotten grounds, unaware of the vibrant life that had once pulsed there or the cataclysm that had reduced it to silence. Yet beneath the surface, the echoes of Nishapur's tragedy lingered, waiting for voices to uncover the stories long suppressed by history. It was not until modern archaeologists and historians began to peel back the layers of earth and time that Nishapur's true story emerged from obscurity. Through painstaking excavation, fragments of pottery, charred timbers, and crumbled foundations testified to the city's grandeur and its sudden, violent end. Textual analysis of ancient manuscripts, some preserved in distant libraries, revealed accounts of the Mongol siege and massacre, shedding light on the scale of devastation and the resilience of those who survived. These discoveries reawakened interest in a city that had once been a crossroads of culture and commerce. Nishapur was no longer just a name on a map, but a symbol of the profound human cost of empire and conquest. The ruins, once a warning of destruction, became a source of knowledge, prompting reflection on the forces that had shaped the region's history and the fragile nature of civilization itself. The shadow cast by the Mongol invasions stretched far beyond Nishapur. Their conquests reshaped population patterns as survivors fled to safer lands, dispersing cultures and traditions across vast distances. Trade routes shifted to avoid the scars of war, altering the flow of goods, ideas, and people along the Silk Road. The Mongol Empire's impact was thus as much cultural and demographic as it was political, leaving an indelible mark on the fabric of Eurasian history. In the aftermath, the landscape bore witness to both loss and endurance. Fields once irrigated by the intricate canals of Nishapur lay fallow, a testament to the deliberate destruction that had crippled the city's lifeblood. Yet, scattered communities preserved fragments of the city's heritage, stories passed orally, manuscripts hidden and safeguarded, traditions maintained in exile. These threads of memory wove through displaced peoples, ensuring that Nishapur's spirit, though battered, was not extinguished. The historical reckoning with Nishapur's fate challenges us to confront the darker dimensions of conquest. The Mongol approach was not merely about expanding borders, but about erasing identities, destroying the social, economic, and intellectual pillars that uphold a civilization. Understanding this legacy deepens our grasp of the true cost of empire building, reminding us that the consequences of war reach far beyond the battlefield. Today, Nishapur stands as a poignant symbol, a reminder that history's most devastating moments are not merely about ruins and relics, but about the human endurance that flickers amid destruction. Archaeologists uncovering carved stones and burnt manuscripts do more than reconstruct a city. They revive the voices of those who lived, loved, and resisted there. Their work illuminates the resilience of culture and memory in the face of overwhelming power. The story of Nishapur urges us to remember not only the destruction wrought by the Mongols, but also the fragile beauty of the civilizations they sought to erase. It compels us to honor the survivors and their descendants who carried forward the legacy of a city once vibrant with life. Through remembrance, we reclaim what was nearly lost, giving voice to the silenced and light to the shadows of history. In this light, Nishapur's ruins become more than a testament to devastation. They become a beacon of human spirit and continuity. The city's fall, once a symbol of annihilation, now serves as a call to recognize the enduring strength of culture amid the forces that threaten to destroy it. It is a narrative that transcends time, reminding us that the essence of humanity persists even when empires crumble and cities burn. Thus, as the dust settles over the ancient plains, Nishapur's story continues to unfold, not in the silence of forgotten stones, but in the living memory of those who seek to understand and preserve its legacy. It is a story of loss and survival, destruction and renewal, a chapter of history that teaches us that even in the darkest hours, the light of human endurance can never be fully extinguished.